After Gatorade game leaders, we focus on D'Angelo Pons, your Big Ten Defensive Player of the Week. 2 picks, one of them returned for a score, 5 tackles on the day as Indiana improved to 8-0 over the weekend, and they are getting ready to make it 9-0, which if they do it, it'll be the first time in the history of Indiana football that they are 9-0 to start a season. They got Michigan State coming up this weekend. That's what's preventing them from being 9-0. How big a challenge will the Spartans provide?
I think they're going to be a really formidable challenge. When you look at the way Michigan State's begun playing here in recent weeks, Aiden Childs, yes, he's still kind of been good for like 1 turnover per game. It'll either be 1 interception or 1 fumble lost. But he is protecting the football at a higher level here in recent games than where he was earlier in the season. And so that Hoosiers defense has been so exceptional and has been in attack mode. Then they're not necessarily going to be able to create extra possessions for their offense in the way that we've seen Michigan State's offense start to, kind of figure things out in that regard. And what I think has accentuated Aiden Childs' ability to protect the football is the fact that their run game has gotten going. We've seen Kayron Lynch-Adams. We've seen what they've been able to do with the run game and Nate Carter, starting to use the physicality up front on an offensive line that, before now had some experience coming into this season. But it is the first season with Jonathan Smith and Brian Lindgren in that offense. But those 2 guys as play callers and Smith as a head coach / offensive mind, they've always been really effective with their zone blocking scheme. And I really thought it would be the inverse of what we saw this year from Michigan State. I thought the Spartans would begin to run the ball well early and kind of figure the passing attack out. It's sort of been the inverse of that, where they were really explosive in the passing game and have now begun to figure out the run game. So it's a big challenge, I think, for the Hoosiers defense. But we see week after week, they are up to that task. They are up for that challenge. You talked about D'Angelo Pons. The first series of the game with a pick 6, you got your backup quarterback going into the game in Taven Jackson. How much more comfortable can it get before you've even played an offensive series? You take the field with a lead. That is a huge deal for the confidence and the comfort you can allow your backup to take the field with. And it's a Hoosiers defense that their front 7 was getting the majority of the shine here in recent weeks, and now we see the way their secondary can make plays as well. So it's going to be a night that I think, for both teams is going to be a big deal to go into this game and sort of play within themselves. But it's one of those things that I think helps Curt Cignetti sleep really well at night because he knows it doesn't have to all be on that Hoosiers offense. He's got one of the best defenses in America.
Well, you mentioned Aiden Childs, who had trouble losing the ball early on in the season, 9 picks. But in the last 3 games, he's only lost 1 interception. So he's done a nice job turning the corner. Speaking of quarterback play, it was kind of the big picture hurdle last week for Indiana. They don't have Curtis Rourke, their star quarterback, the guy who's leading the offense. They bring in Taven Jackson. It was pretty good. Now, granted, they barely passed the ball at all in the second half, so there wasn't a ton of pressure on him, but still, they survived without him. How big a difference is it whoever plays the most snaps this week in your mind?
Well, I think, this is the game that I think best case scenario folks are hopeful that Curtis Rourke would be able to return for. But when you factor in the way they're able to run the football, and it's a combination of things. They're really talented in the backfield and beyond even the talents. Justice Ellison, I've gotten to talk to him a couple of different times during the season here. He is such a phenomenally impressive young man. Just that leadership and all the guys they brought in the transfer portal seem fully invested, fully engaged in just being Indiana Hoosiers, what they're doing for this fan base, the joy they're bringing to Bloomington and now the college football world, really being fully behind Indiana as well. So they run the ball really well. Ellison had almost 30 carries in that contest, but he's accustomed to that. He's handled the power conference stage a bit before. And their offensive line, they're not necessarily the deepest group up front, but they're playing at an exponential rate. They can protect the quarterback at a high level. They run block at a really high level also. And, the scheme that they throw at folks is not necessarily like they have a bunch of different things they have to be aware of as the O-line. A lot of their run and pass schemes look very similar within that RPO system, but they're led by their center on the interior, Mike Kadick, and he makes sure that they diagnose what's happening pre-snap, whether it's the box count, the defensive front, if they're facing someone who throws a bunch of stem and movement at them, like they'll face this week against that Michigan State defense, they'll be ready for it. And they've been performing at a really high level there, not only as pass protectors, but as run blockers. And so even if we don't see Curtis Rourke again, we know they've got a unit up front. We know they've got playmakers outside at receiver. We know they've got running backs who will help in pass protection and are very versatile out of the backfield as pass receivers and physical runners. So the totality of what Indiana does on offense, both schematically and from a personnel perspective, they really insulate whatever concern there might be about Taven Jackson, who does know this offensive system because he's gotten a little bit of time, but he's been around this program for years, even predating Curtis Rourke Curt Cignetti arriving this season.
They continue to be the #1 story in the country.
Right.